Optimism.
Pessimism.
Hope.
Despair.
Hopium.
Realism.
Do we need to be cheerful or irrationally optimistic to get people to listen?
Or is soft-pedaling our most critical existential crises precisely the reason we've not been acting like they are an emergency?
We'll dig into this.
And I'll share details of my growth-busting New Year's Eve caper.
Next.
Calling. Call a GrowthBuster. Whoa.
Welcome to the GrowthBusters podcast about coming to terms with the limits to growth. In this podcast, we bust a lot of myths about the goodness of growth. We roast the growth pushers and toast the transition towns, degrowthers, steady staters, child-free, and others who get that there are limits to growth and small is beautiful. I'm Dave Gardner, director of the documentary GrowthBusters, Hooked on Growth, and founder and senior fellow here at the Center for Busting Pro-Growth Mythology.
And I'm Stephanie Gardner, GrowthBusters board member, environmental law and policy buff, and sustainable energy enthusiast. You'll find us at growthbusters.org, search for GrowthBusters on Facebook, groups.io, and of course your podcast app for the latest growth-busting news.
Well, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you.
Since this is our first podcast of the new year, 2025, we're recording on January 7th, 2025. It seems fitting that we might talk a little bit about optimism. You know, the world is troubled, and I was really struck that while I was watching the Golden Globes Awards show earlier this month, that a lot of the acceptance speeches really alluded to that. But we know that it's more than what the film and television professionals were discussing. I think they were talking mostly about the fact that we're about to have a narcissist and felon as U.S. president. I'm concerned about that. But even more so, I'm concerned that our civilization is starting to crack at the seams because we've outgrown the planet and she's pushing back. And in fact, I was really also struck during the Golden Globe Awards by Wicked director John Chu when he was accepting the Golden Globe for Best Cinematic and Box Office Achievement. He had something pretty interesting to say. Let me share that with you.
In a time when pessimism and cynicism sort of rule the planet right now, that we can still make art that is a radical act of optimism, that is empowerment, and that is joy. And so when we discover that maybe the world isn't exactly the way we thought it was, that maybe we're a little bit alphaba inside of us, that maybe that we have that courage and that strength to not give up, but to rise up and take the road off the yellow brick road and maybe discover we can fly. Thank you very much. This means so much to all of us.
I just really liked that phrase, radical act of optimism.
Yeah.
But I also wanted to talk about optimism a little bit, Stephanie, because telling people that we're in an ecological overshoot emergency is, really kind of bad news. It doesn't sound like a cheerful, optimistic message. And I think you've watched it. I've had a good 20 years of really being beaten up by people who say, why aren't you sharing something more joyful? People do not want to hear bad news. Maybe that's why you haven't really gotten anywhere trying to unseat this really unhealthy, destructive worship of growth everlasting. But I look at the last 50 years of work that people have been doing to try to keep us from ending up in this climate crisis that we're in today, and to try to make sure that the world is healthier, that the water is cleaner, we have fewer ocean dead zones, that we have fewer species extinctions rather than more, that our fertile soil is more fertile than ever instead of more sterile than ever. We just haven't made good progress in any of those fronts. And I think during those 50 years, we've had a lot of scientists and advocates, offering cheerful or middling assessments and prescriptions because they didn't want to upset anybody. And so my theory is, well, if you don't tell them the truth about how critical it is, how can you expect them to want to make dramatic changes? Dramatic changes are needed. And people are not going to say, yeah, let's take a chance on completely turning this system upside down because I don't want a dead planet. Nobody's been telling them that we're on course to a dead planet, or very few people. And so I'm resisting that beating that I've been getting. And even though I really loved what John Chu said, I'm struggling with this conflict between, trying to be cheerful so that you engage people a little bit, but also this need to be brutally honest so that they know they can't just sit on the couch and do nothing.
Yeah, I wonder if there's striking the right balance between the two sides of the same coin, if you will. But has John Chu even watched his movie? Because it doesn't seem very optimistic at the end. She's basically like fleeing for her life as everyone is coming down on her. So maybe he's in the middle of filming Wicked 2, and so he has optimism on the mind. But that wasn't my takeaway from watching Wicked.
Okay.
That's just a little tangent. But no, I hear what you're saying, Dad, and I tend to agree with you that there has to be that hard truth and honesty. We can't sugarcoat that. That's not going to serve anyone. But I do think that the human psyche needs something to go after that is that vision of a better future to motivate them. And I think we have to remember that we're up against capitalism. We're up against this ingrained system. We're up against the billionaires, and they have all of these amazing tools now to tell us the story they want us to hear. So how do you battle that? How do you get through, whether it's through scare tactics or not even scare tactics, just being honest, brutally honest, or messages of hope? I honestly think it's going to change year to year as we go through this crisis that we're in, right?
Yeah, and here I am. I kind of feel like I've got this big bucket of mud here at my feet, and every week I reach into it and grab a handful and throw it against the wall and see if it sticks. I keep trying different messages and different tactics and techniques to try to see what might break through. And, the question remains, is optimism required in order to alert folks to this overshoot emergency? And I really wanted to talk about that a little bit today just because of a recent adventure that I went on that I want to share about, and that is my New Year's Eve growth-busting caper. Some activists and I, in a Zoom meeting, were kind of lamenting the fact that the presidential campaign, Dave the Planet, did not manage to break through and find a way to catch attention either in the mainstream media or on social media independently. So what's next? What can we do? We need to keep trying. And someone mentioned billboards. They thought billboards were a great way to talk to people beyond the choir. And as you know, I managed a pretty innovative billboard campaign in Vancouver, Canada, several years ago about overpopulation. And it got some attention, but it also got a lot of negative attention. And maybe sometimes you just have to say, well, negative attention is better than no attention. So we talked about billboards. And of course, the problem with billboards is they're expensive. The GrowthBusters project doesn't have a lot of money, and most degrowth activists don't have huge budgets either. We can't compete with Procter & Gamble to rent billboard space.
Refer back to the capitalism statement I mentioned earlier.
Yes, you inspired me to go straight to Procter & Gamble on that, or Exxon, let's say, or the American Petroleum Institute for that matter. So I mentioned that, some activists around the world in recent years have taken to projecting billboard type images or messages onto the walls of buildings because you don't have to rent that space. It is apparently not illegal to project something on someone else's building. So far, no one's been able to prevent activists from doing these, I'm calling them guerrilla billboard projects, pop-up billboards. And that's not very expensive. You just have to have a projector and some means of powering it and a couple of people who want to go on that adventure. So we experimented with that a little bit here in my hometown of Colorado Springs during the month of December, hoping that we would see if it worked and put together kind of a toolkit that we could share with activists around the world. Hey, try this at home if you like. Here's something that you can do. It doesn't take a lot of money, and it could be a little bit of fun. I do want to offer a disclaimer right up front before I talk more about it, that anything I say about what's legal and illegal don't take this as legal advice. I'm not an attorney and I can't give you official legal advice, but I will report to you what I have found and what my theories are about that based on the research I've done so far. First of all, in one of my tests, I just took this basic little projector, kind of a standard projector that you would find in the conference room at a small company. And we thought we would see whether that projector would be powerful enough. And I found a really good site of a building in downtown Colorado Springs. And we parked on the second floor of a parking garage right next door. And we put the projector on top of a SUV. And we had an extra car battery, a Sears Die-Hard. And we connected the inverter to that, so that battery DC power was being converted to AC to run this little projector. And it worked surprisingly well. It wasn't great. It was a little bit washed out because there was a fair amount of light spilling onto the side of the building from the lighting of the parking garage. So we learned that we're better off if we can find a darker wall, and that it probably would help if we could find a more powerful projector as well. So New Year's Eve comes along, and that's a time when there might be more people downtown at night to see our messages than usual. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do a more official long-term projection. I borrowed a more powerful projector. The first projector, the one I had here, is a 3,000 lumen projector, and power usage is 240 watts. So I borrowed a projector that's 5,500 lumens.
Almost twice as much.
And it burns about twice as much energy. And in fact, it was too much for my inverter. My inverter would not power that projector. So one of the many things we do with GrowthBusters donations is we fund these projects. So I got a bigger, more powerful inverter. And I found a wall that didn't have as much light spilling onto it and was huge. So I went downtown and set up on this, and the projection, it was huge. It had to be 30-foot wide image.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, you could see it from a couple blocks away. So it was really pretty cool. And I snapped some pictures of it, and if you go to the new GrowthBusters Instagram account, GrowthBusting, you'll find some pretty recent posts that are pictures of that. So I'm going to do this on New Year's Eve, and getting back to this optimism thing, I had to think about, okay, what am I going to project? What kind of messages? I definitely wanted to present the brutal truth because that's my job as GrowthBuster in chief. But I didn't really want to encourage a property owner to come and give us the boot because we were parked on private property and projecting on a building owned by the owner of that parking lot. And so we could be accused of trespassing and asked to leave. And I didn't want to encourage the property owner to want us to go. So I wanted the messaging to be sort of celebratory New Year's Eve kind of messaging. Also, I thought, a police officer might be driving by and might be inclined to come and try to get us to cease and desist. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what the reason would be, but we've got some troublemakers.
Probably make their night a lot more interesting than it otherwise would have been.
So I wanted messages that weren't going to pick a fight. Okay? Brutal honesty, but don't pick a fight. And that's just sort of the challenge that we have to deal with. So I think I came up with some pretty good ideas. I put several messages together and had them in rotation, so 10 seconds at a time. And I started with a Happy New Year. And I had about 2 minutes worth of messages. So every 2 minutes you would see Happy New Year. And some of the other messages that I projected, just a photo of the big blue marble, Earth. And then the rest of these were just yellow words on a black screen. We are in an ecological overshoot. That's one. Another was, we have outgrown the planet. Another was, overpopulation times overconsumption equals dead planet. One of the more daring ones because, people still run scared when you want to talk about overpopulation. Another, let's leave our kids a bright future, not a dead planet. Another, might as well face it, we're addicted to growth. Next one was CO2 in atmosphere, 1986, a safe 350 ppm. Today, 425 ppm. The next one was mammalian biomass pie charts that really showed the stark difference between the makeup of mammals on the planet 100 years ago and today.
I love those pie charts.
Yeah.
Those are great.
It's almost all us and our livestock today. The next one said, we're in ecological overshoot. Google it. Because most people do not know what overshoot is or ecological overshoot is. That's one of our missions, is to change that. The next one, caring for Mother Earth. It's a do-it-yourself project. And then this one, which I thought was really the best and most important one for New Year's Eve, New Year's resolution. Let's live more lightly on the planet. So kind of bright, optimistic, gives people something to do, but I've given them a lot of reasons to want to be interested in doing that. And then a few others, in fact, some that were intended to be pretty inspirational, like we are the ones we've been waiting for and be the change. So that's what I put up there. And I kind of felt like I did a good job of, walking that line between telling the full truth and not picking a fight or running people away. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a really good mix. I think it's a lot more powerful if someone were to stand there for the 2 minutes and see all of these. So my next question is, do you think anyone saw your messages? Do you know if anyone saw your messages? And did anyone come say, what are you doing? What's all this about? Or was no one around?
I was disappointed how few pedestrians walked by, and even the traffic. I was 1 block away from the real heart of the city's nightlife, because that's where I had to be to have this perfect wall. Perfect in every way except not being in the heart of the entertainment district. So no conversations. And very cleverly, we had someone lined up who called the news tips lines for all of the local TV news and reported, hey, somebody's projecting something on the wall of this building downtown. You might want to go check it out. And they all sounded pretty interested. However, we did not get any news coverage. One reason might be that I did get kicked off.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. We didn't manage to last. I started projecting about 5:30 p.m., and I thought, I'm just going to keep on projecting till midnight. I've had a cooler in the car with dinner, and while I was sitting there babysitting the projection, I had another laptop hooked to a hotspot so that I could do social media posts, and I recorded video of me standing out there in front of it. And I was quite busy. In fact, I never did get a chance to eat. But 2 things. One is that auto battery only ran this big projector for an hour before it gave up the ghost. So I had to hook up the inverter by jumper cables to the battery of the Toyota 4Runner that I was projecting from. And it was a very cold night, so I had the projector not on top of the 4Runner, but inside the back, so that all I had to do was have the back window down, and I could sit in the car and maybe be halfway warm.
Somewhat warm.
But I had long underwear on and hat on, and I was trying hard not to freeze to death. So I hooked up to the jumper cables, but I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to have to keep the engine running because otherwise I'm going to have a dead battery. And
you're not going to get home.
Yeah. So for hour 1, I'm running on this extra battery. Hour 2, I'm running the engine. Sitting there running the engine.
Yeah, not a good look.
Yeah. And it wasn't a look as much as just my own internal conscience. It was just bothering the hell out of me. I just couldn't bear it. You know me.
You're the idling police.
Yeah, I will not sit in an idling car for 15 seconds.
Me neither.
Yeah. And so after an hour, I'm thinking, I just can't keep that going anymore. So I hopped out of the car. I thought, I better go get some wider pictures of this because it's a really beautiful success. So I want to document it well so that I can inspire others to give it a try. And so I'm out at the far edge of the parking lot shooting some pictures when a security guard pulls up and asks me if I'm authorized.
And what did you say?
I said, authorized? Well, I don't know. What does that mean? So we had a pretty polite and fun conversation. I told him that I didn't think I was doing anything wrong because I had paid to park in that parking lot. And I'm just parked in that parking lot.
So clever.
He didn't buy that. He said, well, if you weren't projecting at the same time, you could park there. So you can go turn off the projector and you can park there. And I said, well, that's not nearly as much fun. I believe I'll just go home. And it was so cold that I was halfway relieved. I had a good excuse to. Yeah. So I was only out there for 2 hours, and maybe the news crews just hadn't gotten around to coming down there yet to film us and interview me to find out what was going on. But, I'm just notorious enough here as the GrowthBuster in Colorado Springs that it could be as soon as they figured out. They might have, looked at what I was projecting, and we made a landing page, growthbusters.org/overshoot. and put that URL on the bottom of all the slides. So they could figure out pretty quick it was GrowthBusters, and it could be that they called into the news director and he said, oh, that's Dave Gardner. We're not going to give him
any more platform than he already has.
Yeah. You're depressing us. No media coverage for you. I don't know. But anyway, so we learned more. And it was really pretty fun caper, and I really want to thank Allie and Becky and Ruth for serving on the team that helped us with our experiments and with our New Year's Eve project. One of the most important lessons is this is a lot more fun to do in the summer.
But you have to do later in the evening.
Yeah, but at least you would be warm, so there's some trade-offs there. And, you could project video, which would be pretty interesting, and I actually put together a 2-minute video that I would love to project, but you can't do that where cars are driving by and motorists would be tempted to watch the video. That's too dangerous. So if you want to project video, you've got to be somewhere where it's pedestrians only. So I'm on the prowl looking for some wall where I might be able to do that.
Well, keep us updated.
Okay. So watch, if you're a GrowthBusters follower, watch, because we'll be putting together a little video showing our caper and a toolkit to help you to do it. And in fact, there's a really impressive PDF document out there that other activists had made that's a total how-to guide about how to do this. And the recommendations are for a much more powerful projector than even the second projector we used. But I was pretty thrilled with the job done by this projector that was 5,500 lumens and just burning up just under 500 watts of power. So in the news recently, Jimmy Carter passed away December 29th, and he was the U.S. president who put solar panels on the White House. Ronald Reagan was the U.S. president that took them off, and Jimmy Carter was the president who tried to inspire the American public to conserve energy, to wear a sweater and turn the thermostat down a few degrees in the wintertime. This was largely because we were in this energy crisis. Gas was suddenly really expensive and scarce. I was in college at the time, and the speed limit on all of the interstate highways across the country was lowered to 55 miles per hour because cars burn a lot less fuel. They're more fuel efficient at 55 miles an hour than they are at 65, 70, or even 80 miles an hour. And it astounds me today that there is no discussion whatsoever about lowering the speed limits again, even though we need to get out of the burning fossil fuel business as quickly as we can.
Yep.
We're not acting like the climate crisis is an emergency. No, the president gets on a 747 for transportation, and the speed limit is 80 miles an hour on a lot of highways, and people are driving aggressively and like bats out of hell and speeding routinely. And a lot of that's because, well, guess what? They don't even know what ecological overshoot is, let alone know that we're in an ecological overshoot emergency. So Jimmy Carter, is in retrospect, really quite a hero, and a lot of environmentalists celebrate his environmental message. And I wanted to mention, he's famous for this speech that's known as the malaise speech. And he delivered it on television, live on television, at the height of the energy crisis. And here's something he said to us.
Too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns. But we've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning.
Too many of us now tend to worship self-indulgence and consumption. Human identity is no longer defined by what one does, but by what one owns. But we've discovered that owning things and consuming things does not satisfy our longing for meaning. This was back in 1979. And this is a message, we talk about this today.
I think it's incredible that a president, it's hard for me to believe that a president would say something like that. It seems so contrary to the current American culture of more, me. We're consumers, we're not citizens. You know, the idea of a president talking about finding meaning, like it's a foreign concept to me.
Yeah, even the more progressive presidents, have been, whether they don't know about this or don't believe this, or they just know better.
Yeah.
Because Jimmy Carter was a one-term president, and a lot of people looked at him and talked about him as a failed president. But here's something I didn't know until I just read this recently. His approval ratings shot up 11 points within hours after he made that speech. But unfortunately, his opposition quickly positioned that speech as the malaise speech, and they blamed him for asking Americans to solve problems that presidents were supposed to solve. And that just seems so similar to what has been at play over the last year here in the presidential election. A lot of people say they voted for Donald Trump because they want cheap gas and cheap groceries. That's what Jimmy Carter's opposition keyed in on and made sure that he didn't get reelected.
Yeah, it's interesting. I feel like there was this acceptance of coming together, doing what's required, even if it's hard, even if it's tough, during times of crisis or times of war. You know, the country would rally behind these efforts. And we just don't have the same attitude. You know, I think the closest thing I've seen in my lifetime is the COVID pandemic crisis. But there wasn't this attitude of we need to do what we got to do to keep each other safe or survive this. It really has turned into this is taking away my freedom and my normal existence. And then a lot of the problems around the planet with ecological overshoot just don't seem as close to home as, your family members being drafted or going to war and everyone having to rally around like a wartime effort. So it doesn't feel the same. But that's the type of thing, and I know you've talked about this, especially during your presidential campaign, like that is the level of attention and emergency that we need to bring to the ecological overshoot crisis. We need to be putting the speed limits back to 55 and grounding planes and all of this stuff.
Where are the role models? Most of the role models are wealthy, high consumption role models. The influencers are all showing off their wardrobe and bragging about their yachts or their private plane trips and things like that. And especially over the last 8 to 10 years, it seems like it's become more okay to just be selfish and to be all about me.
Yeah.
I think during COVID, people would have been more inspired and inclined to step up and, wear a mask, stay at home and close businesses if they hadn't been so encouraged by the then president to fight that as an affront to their freedoms.
Yeah.
I don't hear enough people talking about this, but I am quite certain that President Donald Trump, as we went into the COVID pandemic crisis, he knew that he was going to be facing re-election soon, and that he had a roaring economy, and it needed to be a roaring economy or he wouldn't be reelected. And he was really afraid that COVID was going to kill that economy. And it was going to, and it did.
Yeah.
So he did everything he could to downplay the pandemic. He didn't rally everyone and say, hey, this is a serious health issue. We've all got to pull together and try to do the right thing so that it doesn't spread any more or faster. He belittled it, and he didn't care if people died. He just wanted reports of fewer people dying. Mm-hmm. He was concerned about the public perception of it. And so it became this thing about freedom. You're taking away my freedom, telling me I have to wear a mask or telling me that I have to isolate. And I think in other times in our history, everybody would have just said, wow, we just all need to pitch in and do the right thing together to get through this. Now the question is, will we ever return to that? Well, we found out that I wasn't the guy running for president. That was kind of what I was trying to do, was inspire everybody to say, look, we've got this emergency. We all need to pitch in and make the dramatic changes needed so that our kids actually have a healthy planet and a decent future. And I wasn't the one. We need a Gandhi or somebody else could be it, a Taylor Swift or Taylor could get religion about this, and she could do it probably.
She probably could, honestly.
Yeah. So give me a call, Taylor. Let's talk. Or call Stephanie. You two will probably relate a little bit more. So interesting stuff about messaging.
And leadership.
Yeah, we need it. So another interesting thing I wanted to just chat briefly about is that New York City began congestion pricing on January 5th. So there's now a $9 toll for a passenger car to enter mid and lower Manhattan. And interestingly, there are over 300 areas in Europe with congestion pricing. Over 300 places that have that. Surprise, surprise. London has the biggest zone, and of course it's very controversial in New York City. Everybody in New Jersey who commutes into New York is up in arms about this. But and of course New York is doing it, I think, more because of traffic congestion than they are about carbon emissions.
Or air quality.
Yeah, or air quality, although those are certainly a part of the rationale there. But I saw a report that London had a surprising result when they instituted congestion pricing. They discovered that more kids were walking to school. Actually, they learned that more kids were walking or taking public transportation to school. There were fewer kids being driven to school. Well, it was because it was costing parents money to drive them to school. They were getting that price signal. And I wanted to bring that up because we have a pandemic of kids being driven to school here in the United States. I mean, it is crazy. It is crazy how many kids who live maybe a mile or less away from school who could walk, could ride their bike to school. Not even a discussion about that.
Yep.
Their parents pop them in the car, drive them to school mindlessly, and then, the cars are all lined up at the end of the day to pick them up with their motor running, idling, and emitting carbon dioxide. This is just a story I wanted to highlight and say, if you want your kids to have a bright future, let's try to put an end to this
Nonsense.
Yeah.
I'm a big fan of the idea of taxing things that you want less of and subsidizing things that you want more of. Yeah, we're so money motivated. We're so financially motivated. And so that is a great tool. Let people decide what's worth it to them.
Yeah.
But price it to reflect actual costs.
Yeah.
The harm that emissions causes or the benefits of walking instead of sitting for the health of children, for example. Let's subsidize that.
Yeah. And we're going to circle back to these themes time and again before we get to the end of this conversation. But, the truth is, if the price of gas wasn't being subsidized today in the United States by future generations' misery, we do not see in the cost of a gallon of gasoline the cost of the damage that we're doing to the climate. Gas is just way too cheap. If gas was priced appropriately, if we had carbon pricing, then we would be more motivated to think twice about hopping in the car and driving those kids to school. The parents would look at their pocketbooks and say, get on your bike.
Yeah, and there's a domino effect too, right? Like we wouldn't have such large cars and such fuel-consuming cars in the U.S. if our gas was priced like it is in Europe, where all the cars are really small.
Yeah.
And then you have more efficient use of space, less cars taking up space in cities and spaces. So it's all connected.
Yeah, we'd be more inclined to walk. We'd be more inclined to ride our bikes. We would be more inclined to take the train or the bus. And we would combine trips. We'd be a lot more careful with our automobile trips if that price was beating us over the head. I think if we just put a new gauge on the dashboard of every vehicle that was $, that showed you the money that it's costing you with every mile that you drive, even at today's ridiculous prices, I think some people would alter their behavior. I think they get in that car and they do not think about the money they're wasting by speeding, by wasting trips, by driving when they don't need to drive.
By idling.
Idling too. Yeah, man. There you go. I got another news item here about economic growth. News from China's Central Economic Work Conference in Beijing in December. Let me play a bit of a news report from Bloomberg Television about that.
What they did talk about is what their priorities are going to be, and that is boosting overall domestic demand in 2025. Only the second time in the last decade or so that they've outlined consumption as the biggest top priority economically. And no doubt it is, because you have the three main pillars of the Chinese economy. Property sector, that's still in the doldrums. You have exports potentially under threat because of the Trump administration and promises of 60% across the board tariffs on Chinese exports to the United States. And then there's domestic demand, right? The confidence is quite low right now. So what did they say? They're going to lift consumption vigorously.
What about the growth target? Are we waiting until March next year for that too?
You got to wait till March. Stay tuned. The first week of March, National People's Congress will get that growth target, and I'm betting it's going to be around 5%, which was the same target that we got this year.
So there you go. China wants to boost domestic consumption to keep its economy growing. And 5% GDP growth target predicted for next year. 5%, that's, the kind of crazy growth rate that Donald Trump promised, I think, in his first campaign. We rarely see 5% economic growth in the United States. We seem to be fairly happy with 3%.
Well, and these are the largest economies on the planet. So just the sheer size of what's going through them is unbelievable.
Yeah. And for China, 5% doesn't seem like that much because for years they've had economic growth far higher than that as their people rose out of poverty. But now, a lot of their people are no longer in poverty, but the country is really hooked on economic growth. And so they want their citizens to consume just for the sake of higher GDP numbers. And that's just crazy. Meanwhile, the UK economy actually shrank in October, and I wanted to highlight the reporting on this. The Guardian, which does a better than average job of covering the ecological overshoot crisis, even though I don't know that they ever call it that. But they do report on many of the negative consequences of this crazy overshoot global economy. So it was a little disappointing to see a report in The Guardian about this, and it had this subhead: GDP figures underline scale of challenge for labor to get the economy growing. And the story is just chock full of language, both from the reporter and in the quotes, that reflects and exemplifies this unexamined assumption that growth is good, contraction is bad. And I just want to share a couple of quotes from it. These latest figures will send a chill through the corridors of Westminster as the government's growth agenda looks increasingly at risk, said Isaac Stell, investment manager at Wealth Club. Just the people that the reporters go to for quotes.
Yeah. Why aren't they asking for some different points of view?
Yeah, because they're not listening to the GrowthBusters podcast, clearly. Here's another one. A weakening export climate amid rising global policy uncertainties and declining business confidence, exacerbated by the impact of recently announced budget measures, raises concerns about sustaining the growth momentum. Haley Lowe, associate economist at the National Institute of Economic and Social Research, said. You might expect them maybe not to have so much pro-growth bias, but it's just, programmed into us from birth. The British Prime Minister said last week it was the government's aim to make the UK the fastest growing G7 economy. Now, if that's it, we're in a competition. We want to have the fastest growing economy. What is that? Can I translate that for you? British government's aim to be more responsible than anyone else for giving our kids a dead planet. We want credit for that. We want to win that competition.
Yep. What is it? Race to the bottom, I think is what they call that.
Yeah. There are no winners in that competition. And why did the GDP contract in the UK? Declines in manufacturing, mining, production, construction. Those are things that are somewhat necessary, but they're all things that are destroying the planet. We need less of those, not more of those. So one more thing on government addiction to economic growth. There was a recent story in Politico that shared that Jeff Bezos, Larry Fink, and Donald Trump's Treasury pick, Scott Bessent, all agree turbocharging economic growth is the best route to reining in the U.S.'s massive $36 trillion debt. The story, interestingly, also reports that history is not on their side. It doesn't usually work. I wanted to highlight this because it's really a perfect example of why policymakers around the world are just such growth boosters, because it's far easier to just say we're just going to grow the economy to provide the tax revenue to balance the budget than it is to say we're going to do the hard work of reining in expenses. Mm-hmm. Time and again, that's the thing that faces government leaders at the national level and even at the local level. Besant warns in this story that it's the last chance for the country to grow its way out of the record debt without becoming a European-style socialist democracy. They think they can grow their way out of debt. It never works. And one main reason is because growth has costs. Once you've grown past the optimal size of a company or an economy, the more growth you have, the higher the costs. And that's what we're experiencing today. There are no winners in this game either. It's just more expensive than ever to deal with all of the repercussions and costs of continued growth. So that's not going to work.
Yeah, and I think there's an interesting quote from this guy, Kent Smetters, who is a former Treasury official. He's the Penn Wharton Budget Model Faculty Director. And he says that almost all spending in the government is already tied to growth. So if you grow your economy, your budget has to increase. If you think about things like Social Security benefits that are going up over time because of cost of living adjustments or Medicare reimbursements, as your economy grows and things are more expensive, you have to pay more for Social Security and Medicare. So it's all tied together anyway.
Yeah.
It's not going to work. It's not.
Absolutely crazy. Back to Taylor Swift.
I was waiting for this one. I feel like this is dangerous territory, Dad. We don't want to upset the Swifties out there.
Okay. Well, I don't have it in for Taylor Swift. I've actually started trying to listen to some of her music and some of her songs I like, and she seems like a sweetheart. And boy, she has just been successful. She has really just done everything right in that department. But the environmental impact of her Eras tour was assessed recently by Sustainability magazine. And so pretty interesting. This tour covered 5 continents, over 10 million tickets sold, 149 shows in the world's largest stadiums. It generated more than $2 billion in ticket sales. There are cities that have quantified the economic impact of having her tour make a stop or two in their community because all these people come to that community and spend all this money. And all that travel and all that spending of money, it has a footprint. It has an environmental cost, unfortunately. They say that her 53 U.S. concerts in 2023 added an estimated $4.3 billion to the U.S. gross domestic product. And Bloomberg estimated her net worth soared into billionaire status. So there's a lot of impact from these stadium concerts. And I'll make my point about that after I add to that sporting events, which also bring a lot of people into a big stadium. Because just coincidentally, within the last week, the Denver Gazette had a report that over 3,000 people are employed at a typical Denver Broncos home football game. 3,000 people. Now, the visiting team flies in, broadcast crews and announcers fly in. Top games require over 100 people on the production crew, a few locals, but a lot of people fly in. 76,000 fans fill the seats of Empower Field for a Denver Broncos game. Now, how many thousands of them flew in to attend the game? So far to date, I haven't seen any study about that. But there was a study published in Sustainability and Sports Science Journal about just the carbon footprint of college football teams traveling to games. And according to their research, the emissions per game for a college football team traveling in the Atlantic Coast Conference in 2024 was estimated to be over 56,000 kilograms per game. This was just for the team. And, these days there's more fans flying in than there are football team members being flown.
Yeah, it's become very popular to kind of do the whole, well, especially now that some games and concerts have gotten so expensive, it almost becomes like your vacation for the year or something like that. You're spending thousands of dollars and turning it into a trip.
And maybe you're listening to this podcast and you're somebody who has jumped on a plane to fly to a sporting event or to a concert. I'm guessing it's because you weren't previously aware that we're in an ecological overshoot emergency. Now, if you're aware of that and you know that we have a climate crisis and we need to make dramatic reductions in our burning of fossil fuels, if you understand that, then your behaviors going to change a little bit. Personally, I love concerts, but big stadium concerts I don't typically go to and can't afford to go to. Sporting events, I could care less, but there are people who really do care a lot about these sporting events. And so I'm thinking, if it was up to me, if I had been elected president, I don't think it would be smart for me to try to ban NFL football, because of the carbon footprint, even though it seems like that would probably be smart, and to ban Rolling Stones concerts and Taylor Swift concerts just because of the carbon footprint of those events. But who am I to be the one to judge what's important enough to people to keep doing and what's a giveaway? I think if we had good carbon pricing that would change the cost of doing these things, then people can make up their own mind. They can decide, okay, I'm going to give up concerts, but I'm not going to give up Denver Broncos games, or I'm going to give up Denver Broncos games, but I'm going to give up my F-150 pickup, and I'm going to ride my bike to work.
Yeah.
People can adjust their behavior based on their priorities. But if their pocketbook is talking to them, then it makes it easier for us all to be good planet Earth citizens and do the right thing for future generations.
Yeah, or maybe the options change. If it becomes insanely expensive to attend one of these events because they cause a lot of environmental harm, then maybe they film it once and you can download it and watch it, at home, or go see it in a movie theater or something like that. I know that they do live opera in theaters. There's other ways to be able to enjoy these things that doesn't require flying across the country. Or I know people that fly across the Atlantic Ocean to go to music festivals. It's pretty nuts.
That's crazy. Cruises, let's burn a bunch of fossil fuels to move a hotel
across the ocean. Yeah.
And that would change, if the pricing was right. What I'm a fan of is movies. I love to go to the theater and watch movies. And making a movie has a not insignificant carbon footprint. So maybe those should be banned. But I don't want that decision to be made either. I want the carbon pricing, to be in there for the benefit of future generations. And then we'll see what happens. Maybe we stop making films, or maybe filmmaking becomes even more efficient than it is. I know the filmmaking industry works pretty hard on reducing the carbon footprint. And even the Super Bowl, the biggest annual sporting event on the planet, they focus somewhat on reducing their carbon footprint. I don't think they're serious enough about it, but it's something that they try to quantify and they at least think about. That work would be more effective if all the fans and the teams were paying, the true cost in their travel to the game and the energy usage and all the consumption and all the crap that gets manufactured. Just think of all the swag.
Yeah, the swag. And
totally unnecessary. If people understood we were in an ecological overshoot emergency, I think they'd say, yeah, you know what? I think I can give that up.
Yeah, and the single-use drink and food packaging, and the list goes on and on. All of this, everything we've really talked about just comes down to the economic system that we have of use more and more, not a circular economy, not reusing, not living within our planetary means, not even thinking about what those planetary means are. As you were kind of talking through all this, I was thinking about how in the past you've talked a little bit about job sharing.
Yeah.
What if we didn't need all the movies and TV shows out there? I know I can't watch all of them. What if we had half as many because all those people started sharing their job with someone else?
Good point.
Would we really suffer that much if we had half as many movies and TV shows? I don't think so.
Maybe 25%. We might have half a chance of seeing most of them. Yeah. Anyway,
interesting.
Very good point. And then finally, this is a great segue because you said it comes down to this economic system. We're in this more system. And so there's a new book that I really want to read by Robin Wall Kimmerer, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. Have you read that?
I have. It's really good.
I'm ashamed that I haven't read that yet.
Well, I'll send you my copy. You can read it.
That'd be great. I must read that. But anyway, she's written a new book about economics. It's called The Serviceberry, Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World. That's a must-read for all of us.
Yeah, sounds really good.
Yeah. She said, I think in an interview about the book, consumption is fueled by the capitalist market economy that tells us we need to buy more constantly. You're going to be better off if you buy these things. Whereas gratitude doesn't demand consumption. It reminds you that you have what you need already. It cultivates a sense of enoughness that I think can be an antidote to those corporate messages. Amen.
Amen. I was kind of thinking about that and thinking about the podcast and what we might want to be talking about this year. Maybe we could do a little book club. We could both read the Serviceberry and invite another guest to read it as well, and we could talk about it together. That could be interesting. And we could invite our listeners to read it too and listen to the associated podcast episode. Just a thought.
That's a great idea. Let's put that on our to-do list in the next episode. Let's launch that.
Okay.
I want to say thanks for the feedback. We do get emails from people whenever we publish an episode or whenever I send out a GrowthBusters email update, and I so appreciate that. And sometimes it's really pretty meaningful. When there's a good one and we've got time, I will definitely share that. So if you like to be in the limelight, then that's one more reason to write to us or call us and leave us a voice message. We do love to hear from you.
Absolutely.
You can email podcast@growthbusters.org, or you can write a comment at this episode's page on the GrowthBusters website, or you can leave a voice message at 719-402-1400.
You know, having intelligent conversations about Overshoot is so important. So please share this episode with people you love or anyone who needs to learn about limits to growth. Could be your mayor, your governor, senator, your prime minister, president, journalists, the list goes on.
Yeah, and be sure and follow the podcast on your podcast app so you don't miss an episode.
Check out the GrowthBusters online community at groups.io.
I want to thank Jake Fader for writing and producing the GrowthBusters theme that you hear at the open and close of this podcast. And I want to thank Carlos Jones for singing it.
Learn more about the issues we discuss in this podcast at growthbusters.org.
That homepage is also where you can donate or get on our email list.
And if civilization doesn't collapse first, we'll see you next time.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some may just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather, but no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters.